guys, and welcome to Creepypasta Time. We're gonna do Cheeroliees Garden today. My friend, he told me about it.
Cheeroliees
it's pretty good.
shuffled into the prompts corner for a third time.
God dang it! I'm not gonna give up I'm not gonna do anything. I'm just gonna do like. Oh, that's part 8. I need part 1. Here. We're gonna do this, we're gonna read this. Well, not read this. I'm just gonna play Minecraft while you guys listen to this. Well, I'm also listening to this, so I'm gonna have it on the loudest, okay? Okay, start.
Hello, fillies and gentle courts. This is Mr. Manwriter bringing you the best in fan fiction that I can possibly ascertain. Get my hands on. So seeing that there still isn't any suggestions from my last video, I will be reading another one in my possession, Cheeroliees Garden. From what I've heard, it is horrible, and what I've read so far, it is horrible. Like, Cupcake's horrible, but it's well written, I guess. So let's get on to the reading. Also, sorry, like, taking longer time. It's gonna be like 8 parts because apparently YouTube's a jerk, so I need to, like, have, like,
YouTube is a jerk.
1 million some, like, subscribers if I'm gonna have, like, a video that's 16-minute long. So on with the reading. Some words in advance. It all began as a joke in a chat room. Somebody said, we should totally write this, and so I did. I realize that's not much of an excuse for letting this loose on the world, but perhaps it'll make you judge me a bit more kindly when we get to the end of the story. Look back and wonder, who would ever think of writing something like this? At least I hope it will. Thanks to Cheerly and Dash for joking around and inspiring this fanfic with your ideas. Thank you as well for all of the advice, ideas, and proofreading you continued to provide as time went on. Thank you to Teve, Quilivia, and Arbresh for all of the proofreading you did. And thanks also to every member of the MLP team's Central Steam group who randomly heard me talk about this and provide input. You all helped in your own way. Thank you. Cheeroliees Garden, an extremely grimdark, read GORY. Story by Unahim. UNAHIM. Alright, so. The entire theater complex was abuzz, with the voices of hundreds of excited ponies. As Cheerly peeked out carefully from behind the curtains hiding the stage, she saw rows upon rows of ponies sitting in the stands, moving between them, talking to each other as they waited and tried to make one last trip to get some food or beverages before the show. She glanced quickly to the left and then saw that the musicians had already set up in the orchestra pits in front of the stage. They'd only be needed for a few scenes, but Cheerly was still glad to have them. Seeing such a big crowd gathered there made her a bit nervous, even though this had all been her idea. Almost all of the seats were taken, and Cheerly knew there were barely enough to accommodate the entire population of Ponyville. The show would be subjected to the scrutiny of a great many ponies' eyes indeed. She retreated back behind the curtains, hoping no pony had seen her. She felt that would somehow be unprofessional. Everything seemed to be in order as she inspected the stage for the last time. All of the props and equipment were beautifully made, straight from the hooves of the masters. Cheerly had only needed to tell them what they needed, and they had provided it without any questions, even though certain items had seemed unnecessary. After all, they didn't know what she had in mind for this night, and while she did, she was quite sure some of the props would make even a professional theater jealous. The stage was divided into sections, each providing its supposed location. This way, it didn't need time or backstage ponies to change the decor after every act, cutting down the time needed for scene change. Cheerly was a big fan of the system, as it meant that there was one less thing for her to worry about. She turned back and headed for the stage left, where her students were busy getting all dressed up. It was total chaos, with bits and pieces of costume scattered around the room, as if they were sprinkles in a cupcake. At the center of this mess were the Cutie Mark Crusaders, as Cheerily came to expect. The fact that none of them had sprouted their making trouble cutie mark yet surprised her more every day. Hey, sorry. Hey, that's my helmet, Scootaloo told Sweetie Belle accusingly. Yours is over there. No, it no, it sure isn't, she replied as she lifted her knightly helmet off of her head and held it out for Scootaloo to inspect. This one has a hole in it for my horn, see? Are y'all sure it isn't my helmet? Apple Bloom interjected as she scratched her head. The king wears a crown, the other two snapped back. Cheerily sighed and quickly threw a glance to her other students. Silver Spoon and Diamond Tiara seemed to be progressing orderly, if slowly, mainly due to how they constantly flourished and admired each other after every article of clothing they put on, and after every single brush of their mane. Snips was, to her great surprise, ready and waiting. The fact that Snails was backstage on tech duty might have had something to do with that, she mused. She remained confident they'd make it in this time, as she'd had a great foresight to start them all on preparations much earlier than any pony would have thought necessary. She had come to know this little group throughout the months, and she was prepared for almost anything. Nothing could go wrong today, as she had put too much planning and work into it, all to see it fail now. She smiled as she envisioned the peace, quiet, tranquility, and relief she'd feel when this was all over. All right, students, she chimed. Let me just run you through the steps one last time. There was much groaning and to be heard across the room, but Cheerily wasn't taking any chances with this bunch. If you still have a part to play, but aren't needed on the set, come back here if your role isn't played out. Exit the stage on the other side. You'll be able to watch the rest of the play from there. That is, if you haven't seen it enough already. She paused a moment to ascertain every pony was still listening, and they all nodded. If you forget your lines, just improvise, or pick up from the point in the script that you recall. And if the pony you're playing with skips some of the lines, try to correct them. Don't try to correct them. Oops. Remember, we may notice if some pony doesn't follow the script, but the audience won't as long as you keep the dialogue flowing. Someone's an extra. I'll explain that later on near the end. In the last look at it. The fillies and Snips nodded again, and cheerily smiled at them. Good. Now get ready. I have to see the opening of the show, so be ready on set in no more than 10 minutes. She walked away as the young ponies got back to it, and Cheerily thought they seemed to quarrel and delay slightly less this time, though that probably was just her imagination. The last one she had to check up on was Snails, whom she put backstage due to his absolute inability to do even the most basic of acting. All they'd have to do there was listen for certain cues and carry out one exact action. She'd even written all of it down on a list that was easy enough to follow, even for him. Up to this point, he'd done okay during the practices, but you never knew. She gave him a few reminders, and he reassured her that he wouldn't let her down, all the while wearing that idiot grin of his. Cheerily sighed and went back to the main stage, resigned to the fact that she'd be able to leave this one up to fate. She was pleased to see the other ponies already gathered in position when she got there, all of them sitting around the U-shaped table in the open end of the table, pointing towards the direction of the crowd. Apple Bloom was dressed up as someone of royal descent, a shining crown on her head and a regal mantle flowing behind her. To her right were the remaining two Cutie Mark Crusaders, both dressed in exaggerated versions of knightly armor. Sweetie Belle's was colored as white as her own coat, while Scootaloo's was bright red. Considering the glaring difference in colors, Cheerily wondered how they could possibly mistake each other's helmet for their own anyway. Compared to the two other ponies, On the other side of the table, they looked heroic and chivalrous. Well, which was exactly the idea. Silver Spoon's costume was pitch black, while Diamond Tiara's was a deep purple. The style of the costumes was likewise different from the two knights. They both wore something akin to a courtier's dress or a diplomat's gown, then a warrior's armor. Mean looks are being exchanged all over the table, and Cheerily couldn't decide if that was genuinely trying to get into character, or if the natural animosity of the Cutie Mark Crusaders towards the other two fillies was at work there. The only acting pony who wasn't on set yet was Snips, but then again he wasn't even needed in the next scene. Cheerily walked over to the left side of the stage and held the curtain aside for herself. The leader of the orchestra immediately spotted her as she emerged next to him, and then raised an eyebrow questioningly. She nodded to him, and he nodded back, turning his attention towards the musicians, most of whom were friends or family of the actors. Cheerily slipped back behind the curtains as she heard the first soft notes float through the air. By this time she was back in the center of the stage, the music increasing in volume, and could be heard all throughout the theater. The conversation slowly dying down as every pony took their seats. Cheerily looked to see Snails, thankfully in the right spot between the stage lights, waving at her sheepishly. The ushers took their cue from the music, and slowly the lights in the theater all died down. The pace of the music increased, and the feeling of anticipation intensified, until suddenly the curtain slid open a few feet. Accommodating by the rolling of drums, she stepped forward past the curtains as Snails turned on the spotlight and aimed it at her, bathing her in a circle of light as she moved, despite the curtains being partially open. In the darkness behind Cheerily revealed nothing to the audience. The music died down, and Cheerily's voice took over, ringing out crystal clear throughout the enormous room due to the perfect acoustics. Fillies and gentle courts, it is with great pride that my students and I welcome you to our very own play. They have all worked so hard over the past few months, and we hope that you will enjoy it as much as we enjoy bringing it to you. Of one thing I am certain, this will be an evening you won't soon forget. Cheerily smiled widely despite herself. Most of this was just the kind of opening she thought every pony would expect, but she was certain that the last part would turn out to be all true. And now, without further ado, I am proud to introduce, performed in Ponyville for the first time, Renaud the Sly. The music exploded again during her last words, and she disappeared behind the curtains, following them to the right side of the stage. As they slid open behind her, the music died down once again as the spotlight was turned off, and the main stage lights were turned on, slowly illuminating the scene. Cheerily could hear the play starting while she went down a set of stairs to go underneath the stage. The size of the stage itself was impressive, but the area underneath was simply amazing. There was plenty of room to install all sorts of devices to be sprung up in any play, and the stage itself was thick. She had at once started banging a metal pipe against some of the iron stage supports, while her students were up on the stage to rehearse, just to see if they'd hear it. They hadn't. She'd made her way between the beams supporting the stage and the various props and gadgets that reached down from the stage heading to the prompt corner. She finally arrived at the few wooden steps that took her to a level halfway between the stage and the area underneath it, so that only her head peeked up above the stage level. From there she could watch the play from the same side as the audience without actually being seen by the audience due to the way the prompt corner was built into the stage. From the audience's point of view, it looked nothing more like a slightly raised box. During some of the plays, a prompt would sit there and feed actors their lines if they forgot them. But the dialogue in this one wasn't overcomplicated, and they had never rehearsed with the possibility of a prompt in mind. Cheerily didn't think any of them would even realize she was there. She tried to pick up the thread of the play, since she obviously was missing some of it, on her way there. They seemed slightly further along than Cheerily would have expected it. She didn't know if that was because of them rushing or leaving something out, or if that had just been walking slower than she thought she had been. She shook her head. It didn't matter. This scene wasn't important to her. A grin spread across her face as she sat, watched, and watched, and waited for the scene that was. Alright, that's the end of that area.
I have this
so
on a
this will be the
playlist,
first
so you guys
of
don't have to
8,
worry.
maybe
Like,
9
oh no,
parts
part 2,
in the
blood
Mr.
dead,
Writer
part
Presents,
2. I have to wait
Cheeroliees
forever.
Garden. So far, it's seeming pretty
Don't think
mellow.
about that. Don't.
And so I hope that my terrible voices for Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle. I am a man,
Defense
so
me.
I can't do girl voices, no matter how gay everybody thinks I am. And,
That was pretty funny.
so this is Mr.
Oh,
Man
shit.
Writer signing off. I'll update you tomorrow. I'll put up the next bit tomorrow around
Yep.
9 o'clock, maybe 10 o'clock. This is Mr. Man Writer signing off, wishing you a very, very happy day, and I hope to see you in Equestria. Goodbye.
I did a bad dragon.
Apple Bloom slammed her hoof on the table as she dramatically looked first to the left of the table, then to the right. All of this is meaningless. We still have to put a stop to Reynold the Sly, and I don't care who does it or how, she said, trying her best to keep most of her accent out of her acting. She was perhaps one with the biggest grasp of the script, simply because she found it easier by far to distance herself from her accent if she stuck purely to her lines. As soon as she drifted from them even a bit, it was all over and the accent was back in full swing. It sounded very odd from the mouth of a king, to be sure. But, my king, I maintain that violence is not the answer, Silver Spoon declared. If you would just let your royal advisor and I work out a diplomatic solution, then I'm sure that— No! The king cut her short. Do you think I know what goes on while I have my back turned? The two of you will stay right here. Sir Lancelot the Brave, I entrust you to find the villain and bring him back here so he may face my judgment, she decreed as she leaned forward over the table, pointing her hoof at Scootaloo before banging it on the table again. Just leave it to me. I'll bring him back kicking and screaming, Scootaloo said as she raised her hoof enthusiastically, completely ignoring the script and the lines she should have been using. Fortunately, it came down to much the same thing, which was probably one of the reasons the fillies couldn't hear Cheeroliees grinding her teeth all the way out on stage. Scootaloo got up from the table, bowed down before the king before taking a few steps away from the table and turning around. The lights went out for a short moment, and then when they got turned back on, only Scootaloo was still on stage. The king's table was completely deserted, and less lighting was focused on that area than before. In addition to this, Scootaloo was now carrying a white lance around with her, holding it under one of her wings. The brave knight started walking across the stage, taking roundabout routes about some set props and pieces of decor. These are the wildlands, there is no doubt. So where could that Weasley Renauld be? I hear he is sly as a fox, and true that may be. He will never outwit the likes of me. Speaking thusly, Sir Lancelot came up to part of the stage that was quite obviously representing a mountain with a mine entrance leading into it. The backdrops of the decor served as the mountain, and the shallow mine entrance was no more than a little building on the stage, and expertly made at that. Suddenly, a small hooded figure emerged onto the scene wearing black robes. His face was hidden by the hood, and anyone could deduce that it was Snips, based on his height and simple process of elimination. The new arrival casually strolled down the same path Sir Lancelot was currently utilizing, and it wasn't long before they crossed paths in front of the mine itself. Halt! By order of the king, I, Sir Lancelot, have come to put an end to Renauld the Sly. Are you he? Scootaloo said, perhaps louder than necessary, even during a play. Oh, no doubt, noble king. I am but a simple hermit living on the mountains yonder, the robed figure replied as he motioned towards the mountains in the distance. Scootaloo scoffed at this and raised her chin. A little thing such as you would indeed not have much of a challenge. You look like you can hardly stand upright during a gentle summer breeze. Now tell me quick, simple soul, if I wish to find Renauld, where should I go? Ah! You are indeed fortunate, Sir Knight. The villain you seek has his lair in this very cave. The little robed pony mentioned in the mine entrance with a nod of his head. In there? You're sure of this? The brave knight asked as she peered inside. Of course. Would I lie? You might have to leave your lance behind, though. A lot of narrow passages down there. The filly threw the stranger a few scrutinizing glances, then looked straight at the audience and shrugged. She placed her lance against the rocks outside and approached the entrance. If I don't find him in there, I'm coming back to kick your flank, Scootaloo said, again interpreting the script liberally before heading inside. As soon as she stepped into the darkness, Snip sprang into motion, pulled a rock away to reveal an old-fashioned lever hidden there, not unlike those used to change the direction in train tracks. Hey, it's a dead end down here. What are you playing at? Scootaloo's voice came, echoing from inside the mine. Upon hearing this, Snips pulled the lever into neutral position. At once a metal gate slammed shut over the entrance with the mine. Scootaloo's helmed head reappearing in the light as she looked at the metal bars in front of her with fake astonishment, shaking them violently with her hooves. What is this trickery? Let me out right this instant, or the justice of King Goldenthroat shall come upon your head, be whomever you may. The hooded pony let out a diabolical laugh as he approached the metal gate, standing next to it as he addressed the knight. So he may be roughly facing the audience as well. Be whomever I may? Why, you're thicker than I thought, you righteous foal. It is, of course, I, Renauld the Sly, Snips announced as he drew back the hood to reveal himself. Did you think I would not expect one of you to come here eventually, or that I would recognize the great Sir Lancelot, bravest of all the knights in the realm, when she arrived upon my doorstep? It is your courage that I shall now be your undoing, she continued, followed by more laughter. Sir Lancelot shook the metal gate some more and tried to lift it up, but alas, she could not. You devil! You heathen! You dishonorable wretch! When I get out of here, it'll be off with your head. Renauld paused for a moment as he put both of his hooves on the lever once more. Then it is fortunate, he said menacingly, that you will never get out of there ever again. He pulled down, and suddenly a great rumbling could be heard throughout the theater as the orchestra kicked in with an impressive display of percussion instruments. Sir Lancelot, much like the audience, recoiled and looked around fearfully, taking a few steps backwards into the mine, and thusly disappearing out of sight. Suddenly there was a large crash as a cloud of smoke or dust erupted from the mine. Once it cleared, and the music died down, the audience could see that the entrance of the cave was once of the the audience could see that the entrance of the cave again. Oh, sorry. Let me just blah blah blah. Disappearing out of sight. Suddenly there was a large crash as a cloud of smoke or dust erupted from the mine. Once it cleared, though, the music died down, the audience could see the entrance of the cave again. But the opening behind the metal gate was now blocked by what appeared to be a wall of stone and rubble. Snip simply took the lance the knight had left behind between his teeth and walked off as the stage lights gradually dimmed down and the curtains closed. The audience remained silent for a moment, surprised by the sudden development. But then suddenly started talking amongst themselves about the events of the play so far. The only one who seemed to have anything bad to say about it was Rainbow Dash, who thought that it was pure folly to kill off one of the characters of the most talented actors in the group so soon. Cheerily left her place in the prompts corner and went back under the stage. She headed in the direction of the faint banging noise towards the part of the directly under the mine. She couldn't help but smile as she thought of everything she had worked for all of these months that was finally about to pay off, and the memories of how it all started involuntarily flooded her mind. And that's how Equestria was made, cheerily concluded her little history lesson. She turned away from the blackboard to face her class, and was once again struck at how eerily unfamiliar the scene still was. Ever since the board had decided to change up the groups and put her in charge of the fillies and foals that need a little extra attention, things had been taking a turn for the worst. She was used to seeing the students off at the end of the year and welcoming new ones back at the beginning of the next. Of course, but of course, but despite that, getting a new group assigned to her out of the blue just didn't feel quite right. Especially not this group, Cheerily thought as she gritted her teeth in pure frustration. It became at once clear that no filly or foal in the room had actually been listening to a word she had said, as per usual. Instead, Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo were having a hushed conversation, while Silver Spoon and Diamond Tiara seemed to be more inclined in admiring each other's jewelry, instead of concentrating at the lesson at hand. In the back row, Snips and Snails were laughing at something that only could ever be amusing to the likes of them. And a smile suddenly crept upon Cheerlee's face as she noticed that, in fact, one single filly who seemed to be paying attention. "Oh, Apple Bloom, would you mind explaining the importance of the day-night cycle to your less attentive classmates?" Shirley asked as cheerfully as she could manage. To her great surprise, and even greater annoyance, Apple Bloom seemed to veer up at the mention of her name, looking around the room somewhat panicky. "Oh, yeah, I suppose let's see here," Apple Bloom said as she scratched her head. "Night and day are important because if there were only one or the other, either Luna or Celestia would be very, very sad," as she concluded with a smile, raising her hoof in a "that's right" gesture. Cheerily gritted her teeth once again. Of course, the one filly who had been paying attention hadn't understood a word she'd said. As Cheerily opened her mouth to formulate a chastising response, Scootaloo suddenly, loudly, interjected, "That's stupid. Really, who could ever come up with a reason as ridiculous as that?" as she pointed her hoof towards Apple Bloom. "I don't see you coming up with any better answer either. And I bet you don't even know what we're talking about," Apple Bloom retorted just as loudly, as she crossed her hooves in front of her chest. "Oh yeah? Why'd I get a better grade in the last test then? We all know you cheated. Did not. Did so. Did not. Did so. Did. Girls!" Shirley shouted. "This is neither the time nor the place to hold such pointless debates. We're here to learn and pay attention. That goes for you all. That goes for all of you. Yes, you too, Diamond Tiara. Don't look so surprised." She paused one moment as she met the gaze of every filly and foal in turn, as they were finally quiet for once.
I think I just broke my
I'd
tooth.
have thought that today's topic was exceedingly important. Sorry.
Sorry if you think this
I
dude
had
is
thought
annoying.
the topic for today's class had been exceedingly interesting for the young ponies who, like you all, witnessed Princess Luna's return, a major historical event that shed much light on the country's history and origins. "Oh yeah," Apple Bloom chimed in. "She was stuck on the moon for 1,000 years, right?" "The moon?" Scootaloo retorted. "That's impossible. Not even Rainbow Dash can fly that high. Besides, what would she eat for 1,000 years? The moon doesn't exactly look grassy from where I'm standing." At this, Apple Bloom remained
She
unusually
was the
silent
moon.
as she pondered the question.
Wow,
She could just eat cheese, right? The moon's made of the stuff. Scootaloo rolled her eyes and planted her own hoof on her forehead. "The moon is not made of cheese." "Oh, it is so." Ahem, came a more serene voice from beside the two.
If you think the moon is made of cheese, you are freaking
"I'm
retarded.
sorry, Apple Bloom.
Sorry if it's
but
offensive.
I have to agree with Scootaloo here. The moon can't be made of cheese." By this point, the other fillies and foals had pretty much reverted to their own activities again, as Cheerily stood softly bumping her head into the blackboard, at a complete loss of what the hay she could do to get through to these ponies. She stopped doing so as she heard Sweetie Belle's calm voice, and her ears rose up as she listened. Perhaps one of them, at least, had some sense in her yet. "It can't be made of cheese," Sweetie Belle started confidently, "because if it was, Luna had eaten a big hole in it by now." "Oh yeah," Apple Bloom said as comprehension dawned on her eyes. "I suppose that makes sense." "No!" Cheerily screamed, as she turned around. It does not. It does not make any sense at all. The moon is not made of cheese because, you know. What? Forget it. Class dismissed. You all have the rest of the day off. Go! She pointed wildly at the door, not trusting herself to be able to keep it calm in the company of these impossible foals and fillies for even a moment longer. She thought she might start breaking things if this went on. All of the foals and fillies in the classroom quickly got up from their desks, nearly galloping for the door. What's up with her? What's up with her? Scootaloo asked as soon as they got out of the room. But while they were still within earshot of Cheeroliees. Meh, I don't even know, Apple Bloom said as she shrugged. They suddenly heard the telltale sound of shattering glass against something coming in from the classroom behind them. They both looked back over their shoulders, and they looked at each other, shrugged, and continued on their way. I think I'll just continue. Scene change. Cheerily paced up and down the length and width of her living room relentlessly. Pieces of splintered wood covered the floor, starting at where the table had once been, and traveling all the way over to the kitchen, where you could just make out the rough outline of what once was the table's legs. Shards of porcelain and hardened clay were sprinkled around, and the place just generally looked like a hurricane had swept through, or two. Cheerily stopped her pacing around at the moment, but only so she could aim a few well-placed kicks at the remaining pieces of furniture in the room. Why? Why can't I get these ponies to behave? She screamed in frustration. And this, in fact, lay at the very center of the issue. Ever since she earned her cutie mark, she had been able to bring out the best in ponies, and watch them blossom, watch them grow. Yet, here were a bunch of foals and fillies that she'd been working on for over 6 months, and they hadn't learned anything. Not a single thing. It ate at her confidence. It kept her up at night. She lay twisting and turning, wondering if she was losing her edge, if she had lost her gift. She spent countless hours at the library Twilight Sparkle tended, under the guise of looking for reading material that might interest her students. When Twilight had noted that she was looking at a lot of books covering the subject of cutie marks, Cheerily told her she was interested in removing the concerns of the 3 of her pupils, the self-proclaimed cutie mark crusaders. But this was not true. The real reason was the one question constantly on Cheerily's mind. Can a cutie mark be mistaken? Is it possible that she never was good at teaching, as I thought I was? That I simply had easy foals and fillies to work with before? Or that the cutie mark was accurate at the time it manifests, but can perhaps grow inaccurate over time? These questions had, and many more, slowly pushed Cheerily down into a shadowy land of depression, as she found her patience wearing increasingly thin, and lose faith in herself more and more. She found it hard to get up every morning, and harder still to bring herself to return to the classroom where she knew that they would be waiting, to turn another day into a living hell. For the last few nights she had been laying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what it would be just like to let it all go. At the times like that she would sometimes tilt her head to look at the glimmering steel of the knife she had placed on her nightstand, just in case she ever found the brief moment of courage she needed to. Cheerily walked over to the huge standing mirror in the corner of her living room, which surprisingly remained intact. She looked at the reflection of her cutie mark in the mirror. Those faces, those smiling faces, seemed to laugh at her, mock her, belittle her, for ever having the audacity of thinking that she was good at something, good at anything. No! Cheerily yelled for the umpteenth time that day. She bucked her hind legs hard at the mirror, her hooves shattering it into 1,000 pieces, joining the mess with the floor. Cheerily's eyes twitched slightly as she panted and stared at the window, into the wild, overgrown garden. Normally it would be filled with beautiful flowers and neatly trimmed at this time of the year, but with the ever-increasing moments of depression and sadness, not to mention all of the trips to the library she had been unable to tend to her garden as well as she would have liked. Vines and weeds choked the budding flowers, and she had planted she started long before suffocating them, slowly squeezing the life out of their growth. She stared first at the garden, then at her cutie mark, before staring at the garden once more. And then suddenly it all became clear to her. It all made sense. It was not her that it was not her. Oh no. She had a gift. A great gift. She had always had it. She had never lost it. She would never lose it. But her garden, her class, was overgrown with weeds. Weeds that had to be purged from it. Flowers, if flowers were ever to bloom again. Vines that had to be cut and removed at the root. If she were to take the responsibilities of a teacher seriously, she quietly sat staring at the window as night fell, the stars and the moon barely illuminating the darkness, enough for her to see. She thought enough for her to see. She thought about what she should do next, what she could do, realizing the plans that what was making the best of what she would eventually save more lives than she would ruin. But some ponies, most notably the families of the weeds, had she had identified, might not look at it the same way. She would be even she wouldn't able to be she wouldn't be able to comprehend the truth of the matter the way that she did. So she'd need to be subtle, she'd need to be crafty. And yet someone inside of Ponyville didn't want all of this to go someone inside of her didn't want this all to go down quietly in the night. She desired a show. She desired a spectacle. She desired to show everyone in Ponyville once and for all how great a teacher she was. Cheerily was able, Cheerily was, and to show them who she really was, and that she could deal with any problem that might occur with the fillies and foals education, even if the filly or foal in question was the problem. She struggled with the sorry. She struggled with the seeming contradictory goals for a while before finally receiving yet another idea. Another glorious idea. I think, she whispered quietly in the dark as she slowly grasped the knife from her nearby nightstand and held it in the light of the moon. It's time for another school play. Suddenly she started giggling. All her fears, doubts, and other dark emotions burst forth in a vortex of madness as she snatched up a picture frame from the desks next to her. The picture contained had been taken just earlier that month, as it was the unusually common teacher and her class photograph that she made every year. She took it out of the frame. She quickly lit one of the candles in the room, surprising that it was still intact and wasn't too broken that it was still intact. As the little flames lit up in the room carefully, as little flames lit up the room carefully, she held the picture onto it. The flames burned brighter and started to consume the picture, licking at the hooves of the foals and fillies whose image it was captured in. And for the first time in 6 months, Cheerily couldn't stop smiling. Scootaloo took a few steps backwards into the darkness and acted surprised, preparing for the trapdoor to open underneath her. She dropped down with great agility as the floor disappeared from underneath her and landed in a sort of metal cage a few feet lower. A cloud of dust was blown out of the mine entrance above her as the metal press came down to fill in the mine and covered the entrance. Scootaloo knew that for the audience it wouldn't look metallic at all, as they had decorated it to look like the outside, that on the outside, which would appear to be stones and rocks to them. Ow! She grimaced as she landed, the bars on the bottom of the cage biting into her hooves as she looked down and frowned. There used to be a large piece of wood covering the bottom of the metal cage, but it was nowhere to be found. There was a great round plastic tub underneath the cage, which Scootaloo couldn't remember seeing before either. Then again, she mused, if it was there already, she wouldn't have noticed due to the wooden platform. She quickly tugged a few strings in her outfit with her teeth, undoing the knots in them one by one. Since these knots kept the entire thing together, it wasn't too long before she could simply shake it off. It all looked very cool, but it sure wasn't comfortable to move around in. She could just leave her outfit here for now. After all, she wasn't able to go back to the dressing room until the show was over, and she sure wasn't dragging it around with her. She reached out for the cage drawer and attempted to push it open with her hoof, but with great surprise, it wouldn't budge this time. She pushed against it for a while and threw her shoulder into it, which she instantly regretted. But still, it would not open. Turning around, she bucked her hind legs at the door in an attempt to force open the lock, but it but she may as well not have bothered. All she ended up doing was sending some banging noise echoing through the area. Dumb door! If I found out who locked this thing, I'm going to, she hissed in frustration, when suddenly Cheerily emerged from the darkness, Scootaloo's head about level with hers for once. Miss Cheerily smiled at the filly as she approached the cage, not saying a single word. Miss Cheerily, I wasn't going to say anything bad, honest. I just that I'm going to be very upset with the pony who locked the door. That's all, she said, sheepishly, as at least Cheerily would probably be able to get her out of there. The orange filly started to feel somewhat uncomfortable as the teacher just stood there, unmoving, the features still obscured by the darkness that reigned supreme under the stage. Oh, I get it. Ha ha, it was a joke. That's really good, Mrs. Cheerily. You obviously haven't lost your touch for pranks yet. Now, could you please let me out? The young filly asked pleadingly, not sure what to make of the mare's strange behavior. Cheerily nodded enthusiastically as she stepped forward with a wide, toothy grin splitting her face. Something about the look on her teacher's eyes shocked Scootaloo deeply. The fact that she saw nothing but hatred and contempt in those big green globes. Something about the look in her teacher's eyes. Blah, 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 blah. Sorry. Cheerily reached out for a lever in the wall and pulled it down slightly, and suddenly a mass of metal above Scootaloo's head started to inch its way down towards her at a steady pace. The little filly suddenly didn't feel as comfortable in the cage anymore, as she let out a little squeal of terror. Wait, what's going on? Please stop. This isn't funny anymore, Mrs. Cheerily. I want to get out. Let me out. Cheerily brought her face close to the cage to stare at Scootaloo, relishing in the terror that she was inflicting upon the little monster that had tormented her so. I thought you wanted to get out of the cage. This is how you'll get out, you little weed. Just watch. Scootaloo's brave facade finally broke as tears started streaming down her face. No, you can't do this. Every pony will know that they'll find out. Apple Bloom and Sweetie Belle will come and look for me and ha! Cheerily interrupted the frantic filly as she burst out in genuine laughter. You fool, those friends of yours are next. And as for the others, well, you'll let me worry about that, all right? You have different problems. Cheerily nodded up at the wall of iron, still inching down. There was now less than half of the original amount of space left between it and the bottom of the cage. No! The little filly screamed as she lifted the front legs above her head, pushing up against the metal, threatening to crush her against the bottom of the cage. And the press protested with some metallic screeching noises and shuddered for a moment, and then almost came to a complete halt. With the machine pushing down on her and pushing up to halt its progress, the pressure on her hooves that remained on the bottom of bars, the cage was immense. She whimpered as the thin rectangular metal strip slowly started to crack her hooves, but she didn't dare move for the fear of being crushed. The machine did not relent, and the cracks in her hooves grew wider and wider, making her pant with the pain as Cheerily stood and watched. Finally, She let out a scream as her hooves broke, and the thin bars were driven down into her flesh. Blood slowly started to boil up around the metal and dripping down onto the tub underneath. Scootaloo bit down on her lip, and as she panted in the immense pain that washed over her while the blunt bars broke her skin, tearing and pulling at her flesh. Please stop. Please, I'll be good, I swear. She managed to get out between gasps of air and cries of pain. That otherwise escaped her mouth. 8 months. 8 months! The mayor suddenly screamed out of fury, abruptly switching over from laughter to anger in the blink of the eye. That's how much time you've had to show a glimmer of intelligence, and you failed. In a fit of rage, Cheeroliees pulled down the lever a bit more, and the metal press instantly started to push down even harder, trying to crush Scootaloo even faster. For the good of all the flowers in the world, weeds like you must go. Scootaloo tried to cry out as the metal bars were instantly pushed down into the fleshy parts of her hooves, the metal grinding angrily to a halt against the bones in her legs. But instead of screams, all that came out of her mouth was a disgusting gurgling sound, followed by waves of bile and vomit as the unearthly pain turned her stomach and nearly made her black out on the spot. The only thing keeping her conscious being the copious amounts of adrenaline her body was pumping into her system, in a desperate attempt to try and survive the ordeal. The foul and sour substance splattered all over the floor of the cage and dribbled down on Scootaloo's body from her mouth, joining the streams of blood that were tumbling into the tub below. Cheeroliees took a quick few steps back as the vomiting started, to avoid getting any of it on her hooves. That'd simply be distasteful. The machine continued pushing Scootaloo down. She now had to bend slightly forward as she began hysterically pushing up with her shoulders and head as well, grinding her hooves even more into the metal below, even as her legs violently shook, unable to take the pressure much longer. The bars in the cage ground against her bare bones, and the slowly began to crack. Scootaloo screamed in wordless terror, pain, and hysteria once more, her mind filled only with the red-hot feeling of pain emanating not only from her heavily mutilated hooves, but also from the rest of her body. Her throat was raw and damaged from all the screaming and vomiting, blood dripping down from the corners of her mouth and upper legs. Shoulders and neck were all feeling the strain from pushing up against the metal. Suddenly the strain became too much for her little pony legs, as the bones in her hooves snapped. The metal strip shot down through her legs. The metal plate pushed her down, cleaving through her young, soft flesh like butter, and splitting her overstressed bones clean in two. The new pain was 100 times worse than all of the pain that had come through before. This sent her into a new fit of vomiting, but all that would come out was a puddle of blood that she spat all over herself. Her body couldn't handle the sensory overload as she teetered on the blink of blacking out, but every new bone that snapped pulled her right back out of the sweet embrace of darkness, and the blunt metal bars shot through her so fast now that she hardly had any time to fall unconscious at all. Blood splattered down onto the tub as though a red liquid had pooled into the lake together with various other body fluids, with
This
more
is
of
worse
it
than
leaking out
cupcakes.
onto Scootaloo's legs as if she were to open a bottle of tomato juice and someone was holding it upside down. The room swam before her eyes as she was too weak to continue screaming. Her forelegs started to give out, and she would soon drop down, and she started to lose consciousness in earnest. Then suddenly, after what seemed to Scootaloo like a century after the metal had broken through the first bone, although it really was only a few moments, the metal plate actually stopped pressing down, and actually lifted up a little bit as Cheeroliees pushed the lever up in an insane look of glee on her face. Scootaloo, now unable
Sorry
to
about my
brace
dog in
herself,
the background. Riley, shush!
brace her weakened
Go!
body against anything as the metal plate slid out of her reach, tumbled back onto the bottom of the cage. The metal bars were still stuck halfway in her legs, holding them in place. Her weakened legs couldn't handle the strain as she toppled backwards into a physically impossible position. and with a horrendous scream and torrents of blood, Scootaloo's legs simply snapped off in the middle. Muscles and ligaments. She had thought the muscles and
Guys, I'm going to pause this for a second. Guys, I'm going to stop this video after part 4. So, I will continue saying this and Minecraft.
simply tearing off at the bone as it broke right around the spit point of the metal bars had created. She had thought the worst pain had been over. For the second time, in a few minutes, she was proven wrong. There was a pain worse than what she had been going through, and this was it. Looking shakily down at the body, at her mangled remains of her legs, and that she was still attached. Looking shakily down at her body, at the mangled remains of her legs that still managed to be attached to her, as well as a little bloody stump sticking up above the cage floor, almost made her barf blood all over herself again. But she simply didn't have any in her anymore. Her body had grown pale due to the copious amounts of blood that she had lost and was still losing, and she probably would die within the next few minutes, even if a fully equipped medical team had appeared on scene right then and there. Cheerily stood to her left foot on the lever, panting heavily and shaking with pure excitement, completely unable to keep the ecstasy that she felt with her twisted dreams finally coming true out of her voice as she spoke. "Any last words, my little weed?" Scootaloo could hardly hear her, even hear her through the ungodly amounts of pain she was feeling, as death started to wrap her in its cold, sweet embrace. Her body lost so much fluid now that she didn't even manage to cry as she thought about all that she would like to say to Rainbow Dash. I'd like being sorry for how she wouldn't be able to grow up to be a grand flyer like she could be. Instead, all that came out of her mouth was a low gurgling and another pool of blood. "I guess not." "Who'd want to hear it anyway?" Cheerily yelled almost hysterically as she pulled the lever completely down. The little filly saw the metal plate storm down at her like a battering ram, as her body was too weak for a bigger reaction than her feeble attempt to raise her front hooves to shield her head. With a sickening crash, the metal pounded down onto the filly, driving her entire body into the bars below. The crash was so sickeningly loud that even Cheerily closed her eyes and turned her head away for a moment, and brought her hoof up protectively. She could feel the warm blood splatter against her face and body before she opened an eye tentatively. The metal construction now filled the entire cage. Scootaloo was nowhere to be found. Blood splatters could be seen in a wide radius around the cage, and the same red liquid dripped down the sides of the tub to make puddles on the floor. With her legs shaking in excitement, Cheerily approached up to the tub, taking care not to step in any of the puddles. For a moment she just stared down into the sanguine lake, amazed that there had been so much stuff packed into a tiny filly's body. Various chunks of flesh and bone floated around in a grotesque sea, as if they were tiny boats. Cheerily angled her head to look at the bottom of the cage and saw little bits and pieces of Scootaloo still trapped between the metal plate and the bars of the cage as well. But apart from those and the huge scarlet stain on the metal, no sign of the filly had ever been there. Remained. Cheerily licked her lips while surveying the scene once more, but suddenly stopped as one bitter taste of iron entered her mouth. She had forgotten that she had gotten the stuff all over her, but it tasted surprisingly good. This must be what they meant when they say vengeance tastes sweet. Cheerily mused as she licked her lips and cheeks clean. She spotted Scootaloo's eyes floating around in the lake of blood, staring up
I'm gonna put a
unseeingly
warning
at the
on
ceiling.
this.
She couldn't help but crack up and laugh hysterically, even as she went to go get cleaned up. Even long after, she had gotten the final last splatters of blood out of her coat, the visible ones anyway. She just couldn't stop. She hadn't seen something this amusing all year. Cheerily finally got back to her spot in the prom's corner, Still giddy with excitement, she stared at the stage without really seeing it, and it took her a few moments to notice that she hadn't started paying attention to the play at all yet. She was still... How do we know that you haven't poisoned these? Stared at the stage without really seeing it, and it took her a few moments to notice that she hadn't started paying attention to the play at all yet. She was still just savoring Scootaloo's last moments in her mind's eye. She shook her head a few times to get a grip and focused on the stage in front of her. Once she did that, it didn't take her long to figure out what scene they were currently on. Cheerily had to suppress another rush of excitement as she realized that the next playtime wasn't all that far off. She saw Silver Spoon in her black noble's outfit and Diamond Tiara in her dark purple gown of the royal advisor approach the cottage of Renaud the Sly. Based on where this scene fit into the story, that meant Cheerily had missed the scenes involving Lancelot's broken lance being delivered back to the royal court, as well as the one where the king decided who was to be sent next. Cheerily didn't mind having missed these at all. They didn't interest her. She only cared about what was to come next. The purple mare was quite proud of the set pieces that together formed Renaud's cottage, considering them to be very nicely made. Instead of an actually closed-off building, only the back wall and the left wall had been put into place, giving the audience a clear view of the building's interior. She didn't want to exaggerate her own work, but she was quite proud of the way in which she'd made it all fit together, through her plans and instructions. With care and caution... I apologize. With care and caution, my dear Dimas, the gray filly with the silver mane said. That's the only way to deal with ponies like him, if you want to harbor any hope of coming out on top, that is. The white and purple maned filly nodded thankfully. But of course, Silver Tongue, I am well aware, and of course in our case, even more thoughtfulness is required. We're not simply telling him to stand down after all. The two ponies exchanged a grin, and they walked down the path towards Renaud's front door, which was placed in the wall to the right side of the house. Of course, the wall itself hadn't been built on stage, but the audience got the basic idea behind it easily enough. The two fillies nodded back and forth in front of the door, until Silver Tongue finally leaned forward with a sigh and knocked on the door. The audience could see a small door open in the back of Renaud's cottage, as the antagonist himself stepped through into his living room, carrying a teapot, which he put down onto the table in the center of the room, next to 3 cups, which were already there. Visitors at this hour of night? I wonder who it could be, the villain said louder than was perhaps needed, with a fourth wall-breaking wink at the audience. He strolled over to the door and opened it, but he left the door chain in place. Yes? He asked, while peeping through the small door opening he created. I wasn't expecting any visitors today. Forget the pleasantries, Renaud dear, the silver-maned filly said. We know who you are, Dimas finished the sentence of her companion. Renaud's frown was clearly visible, even to the people in the back of the theater. Then why knock? Surely you don't believe I'd let you in just so you could apprehend me. The pair of fillies laughed. Apprehend you? No, my dear, you have it all wrong. We don't want to apprehend you. We want to work with you to take care of the king, once and for all. The filly remained silent for a moment, before Dimas added, We know you're a reasonable guy, Renaud. This will be beneficial to you as well. Renaud closed the door and took the chain off before opening it once more, fully this time. All right, come in, he said as he walked to the table in the middle of the room. He grabbed the teapot and stood there by the ear, carefully pouring the tea into the 3 cups on the table. Let's hear what you have to say then, he said, as he started sipping from one of the cups. The other 2 gathered around the table as well, each in front of one of the other 2 cups, which they stared at with suspicion. How do we know that you haven't poisoned these? Silver Tongue demanded to know. How do you know I didn't poison the tea that I prepared without knowing you'd come that I'm drinking myself? Renaud mockingly replied. The other two seemed to relax at this train of thought, sipping their tea slowly. It had been a rather long trip, and the ladies of their style did enjoy their daily cup of tea. Dimas opened her mouth to start negotiations when she suddenly fell silent and stared at the cups on the table. 3 cups. If you didn't know we were coming, then why are there 3? She started before pressing a hoof up against her head as she took an unsteady step back from the table. Oh, stars, you did poison us, but you drank. How? Silver said shakily as she sank to her knees. It was the cups, not the tea, Snips declared as he took another sip. The 2 fillies were swaying about theatrically now, until Dimas suddenly blurted out, Wait, my head, it was really poisoned, before both she and Silver toppled to the ground. Yes, really poisoned? Snip said in confusion. That wasn't in the script. He walked over to the metal ring in the floor and grabbed it between his teeth, pulling it up to reveal a trapdoor. He dragged the perfectly still fillies to the trapdoor one at a time, throwing them into the hole before closing it again. And there they'll rot, Renaud. Renaud doesn't deal with traitors. They're too traitorous, he mused as he exited the stage through the very door that he entered, the stage lights slowly going out. By the time that the curtains had closed, the lights above the audience had gone out to signal the halftime show break. Cheeroliees was already long gone from her seat at the prompt's corner, making her way to an unknown destination underneath the stage. Silver Spoon woke.
Okay, that's it, guys. I will see you in the next video. Bye! I just stole that from Markiplier. And if you throw up during this one or like anything, do not freaking dare watch it again. Bye.